They didn't want them there. Not on the front lines. Not in combat. Not even in the Marine Corps, really. When the United States declared war in World War II, the Marine Corps was the last military branch to accept black recruits. It wasn't until 1942, midway through the war, that the doors opened.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
Assigned mostly to manual labor and supply. The message was clear: you may wear the uniform, but you'll never be one of us. But they showed up anyway, because this was more than war. This was proof. Proof that they belonged. That they could fight, bleed, and die for a country that had denied them almost everything and still do it with honor. They trained in silence. No brass bands, no headlines. Just grit, just sweat. They loaded ammo, moved supplies, dug trenches. They were told that would be their role: support only. Not combat, not glory. Certainly not Iwo Jima. But war doesn't care about policy. And on the volcanic sands of Iwo Jima, all the neat lines: combat troops, support troops, white troops, black troops melted away under the fire of Japanese artillery. The landing was chaos. Bullets tore through air, earth, and bone. The Japanese had fortified the island like a fortress carved straight from hell. Machine guns from hidden pillboxes, mortar raining from the hills, tunnels everywhere, enemies emerging from the ground itself. The plan had been simple: land, overwhelm, secure. What followed was 36 days of brutal, unrelenting slaughter. And that's where the story of the Minford Point Marines took a turn the Corps never intended. They were supposed to haul ammo, manage logistics, repair what broke. But logistics don't stay behind when the front line shifts. They move with it. And soon, the Black Marines, men who were trained for crates, not combat, found themselves under fire. Not once, not by accident, but constantly. They had to fight, because they were being shot at, because their white counterparts were going down and someone had to pick up the slack. Because the war didn't stop to ask what your orders had been. And when the enemy came, they didn't ask what unit you were in. They didn't ask what color your skin was. They shot to kill. And the Minford Point Marines, they shot back. Some defended ammo dumps as if they were fortresses. Others picked up rifles and filled gaps in shattered platoons. Some dragged wounded men across the open sands under sniper fire. And some died right there doing the job they were never supposed to do, in a war that wasn't supposed to need them on the front line. But they were there, and they fought with everything they had. Japanese intelligence didn't expect them. In fact, captured Japanese reports showed they thought black troops were just laborers. No threat, poor fighters, unmotivated. That illusion shattered fast. Time after time, Japanese forces tried to overrun supply points defended by these men. Time after time, they were pushed back by so-called non-combat Marines firing from foxholes, dragging wounded brothers to safety, refusing to retreat. They earned every inch they held, but when the smoke cleared, they were still invisible, because when the war ended, the victory parades didn't include their names. The medals went elsewhere, the history books left them out, and the myth persisted that the Black Marines didn't see real combat, that they weren't part of the front line at Iwo Jima, that they were just support, just background. That's how institutional racism works. It edits, it erases, it praises one while it ignores another. And for decades, that's exactly what happened. The Minford Point Marines were denied not just recognition but remembrance. Their combat wasn't documented. Their dead weren't mentioned. Their heroism was hidden in the footnotes if it appeared at all. Because to acknowledge their bravery would be to confront the lie at the heart of military segregation, that black men couldn't be trusted to fight. But they did fight. They fought at Iwo Jima. They fought for their lives. They fought for a nation that treated them as second-class citizens. And they did it anyway, because they knew the truth. That courage has no color. That bullets don't care about the color of your hands, only the strength of your grip. That real Marines aren't made by policy, they're made in fire. And so, they waited. Waited for someone to say their names. Waited for the silence to break. Waited for the country they fought for to finally see them. It took 70 years. In 2012, Congress finally awarded the Minford Point Marines the Congressional Gold Medal, the nation's highest civilian honor. Long overdue. Quietly given, but meaningful. Because it meant someone had listened. Someone had read the buried records. Heard the voices of the veterans who were still alive, those few who had seen the sands of Iwo Jima and lived to tell the story that America had forgotten to write down. It meant that history, true history, had found its way to the surface. Too late for some, but not too late for all. because that's the thing about truth. It survives. It waits. And in the case of the Minford Point Marines, it burned bright enough to outlast the silence. Their story matters, not just as a correction to the history books, but as a reminder that racism doesn't erase valor, that prejudice doesn't stop bullets, and that every man who fought at Iwo Jima, every man stood on the same sand, bled under the same sky, and died for the same flag. Some just had to fight harder to be remembered, and they did, because they were Marines, because they were warriors, because they were Americans, even when their country refused to admit it. They earned their place in history not through recognition, but through resilience. And now, when we speak of Iwo Jima, when we remember the carnage, the courage, the iconic flag atop Mount Suribachi, we must remember them too. Not as footnotes, not as background, but as what they were. Marines, brothers, heroes. They were told they didn't belong. Not in the corps, not in combat, not in the stories America would one day tell about its greatest battles. And certainly not on Iwo Jima. Because in 1945, when US Marines hit the black volcanic sands of that island, the world had one image in mind: young white men storming the beaches, ducking gunfire, raising the flag on Mount Suribachi. That was the narrative. Clean, heroic, simple. But that wasn't the whole story. Because just behind the front lines, sometimes in front of them, were men no one expected to be there. Men the Japanese didn't prepare for, and their own nation didn't fully recognize. Men who trained in separate facilities, wore the same uniform, swore the same oath, but were told they weren't equals. They were the Minford Point Marines, the first black Marines in US history. And when the bullets came, they didn't ask for permission to be brave. They just were. Their story starts in silence, in resistance. For 167 years, the Marine Corps didn't allow black Americans to serve. Not one. The Army had them, the Navy had them, but the Marines? Never. That changed in 1942, not out of enlightenment, but necessity. World War II was stretching the nation thin. Too many fronts, not enough men. So, with pressure from civil rights leaders and the weight of war bearing down, the Corps opened its doors, just barely. Black recruits would be accepted, but not welcomed. They'd train at a separate base, Minford Point, a swampy, mosquito-ridden patch of North Carolina, while white recruits trained at Parris Island. These men endured inferior conditions, inadequate equipment, and institutional disdain. But they endured. They drilled. They trained. They studied tactics. They fired rifles with the same precision, ran the same miles, endured the same blistering orders. Because they knew this was their shot, not just at a uniform, at a name, at proving something no one wanted to believe, that they weren't just capable, they were exceptional. But even after earning the title of Marine, their role was limited. Segregation didn't end at the gate. They were assigned to ammunition companies, depot units, supply lines. The front line. That was for white troops. Command said it wasn't racism, it was policy. But policy has a funny way of collapsing under pressure. And on Iwo Jima, there was plenty of pressure. February 19, 1945. The largest amphibious landing in the Pacific Theater. 20,000 Japanese defenders. Miles of tunnels, hidden bunkers, machine gun nests carved into volcanic rock. Every inch of the island was a trap. Every movement above the sand invited fire. It was supposed to be over in 5 days. It took 36. And on that blood-soaked island, everything changed. At first, the black Marines stuck to their orders. Ammunition carriers, haulers, loaders. But as the beachhead buckled under relentless Japanese fire, those lines of duty blurred. They had to defend the ammo dumps. They had to carry wounded men back under sniper fire. They had to man guns when Marines fell. They had to fight. There was no front line anymore. The whole island was one kill zone. And so, they fought back. Some did it with rifles. Others with bare hands. Some with grit. Some with rage. Some with the quiet, uncheckable determination of men who had waited a lifetime to prove their worth and now had 30 seconds to do it. They defended positions that were never supposed to need defending. They repelled attacks no one thought they'd survive. And when the Japanese charged, expecting to overwhelm a support unit, they were met with ferocious return fire from men they thought couldn't fight. That surprise? It was in captured Japanese documents. Their intelligence reports described black Marines as weak, untrained, logistical dead weight. But on Iwo Jima, they found out the truth too late. What's most heartbreaking isn't that these men had to fight doubly hard. It's that their own country barely noticed. No medals, no headlines, no names in textbooks. Even after the war, even after they'd risked and given their lives, they were shuffled back into silence. Their actions were chalked up as exceptional support. Their stories sanitized, cut down, erased. Some weren't even counted as combat casualties because they weren't officially combat troops. That's how deeply racism ran. A man could take a bullet to the chest, die on foreign soil defending a supply line under fire, and still be remembered as a laborer. But not all history stays buried, because veterans remember. They told their stories, quietly, at first, then louder. They gathered, formed chapters, pushed for recognition, and slowly, the truth rose. It became undeniable. From the 51st and 52nd Defense Battalions to the 3rd Ammunition Company and the 5th Depot Company, Black Marines served with valor, on Iwo Jima and beyond. They fought beside white Marines who, in those moments, didn't care what color they were. On the battlefield, blood speaks louder than policy. And eventually, someone listened. In 2012, the U.S. Congress awarded the Montford Point Marines the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest civilian honors in the nation. It was too late for many, too quiet for others. But it was real. A crack in the silence. A sign that maybe, just maybe, America was ready to face the truth about the heroes it had forgotten. And this is what matters now, not just the medals, not just the history. It's the legacy. Because what those men did didn't just shift policy, it shattered it. They proved that courage doesn't have a color. That excellence isn't born from acceptance, it's born from refusal. Refusal to give in. Refusal to step back. Refusal to let history write them out. Their story matters not just because they were Marines, but because they were Marines when the world told them they couldn't be. They didn't fight for glory, or revenge, or even for recognition. They fought because it was right. They fought because they were needed. They fought because they were American, even when their country hadn't caught up to that fact. So when you see the iconic photo of the flag on Iwo Jima, remember it wasn't the only flag raised that day. There were others, quiet ones, invisible ones, flags of defiance, of dignity, of truth, raised by men whose names we never learned, but whose courage is carved into the island itself. The Montford Point Marines didn't ask to be heroes. They just became them, under fire, under pressure, under silence, and above it all they rose. And they never stopped rising. Not when they were told they didn't belong. Not when they trained in mud-soaked fields far from the spotlight. Not when they were denied combat roles, medals, or even the full dignity of being called Marine by the very institution they had sworn to serve. They rose anyway, because for the Montford Point Marines, service wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about being written into history books. It wasn't even about justice, though they deserved it. It was about duty, about doing what was right, even when the world said they didn't have the right to do it. It was about proving through sweat, blood, and bone that bravery isn't born in privilege. It's born in fire. And there was no greater fire than Iwo Jima, that hellish stretch of volcanic ash and blackened earth, where Japanese forces were dug in so deep they seemed to rise out of the ground itself, where the air choked with smoke and metal, where a man could die within seconds of landing, never even seeing the face of the enemy, where plans fell apart, and all that remained was instinct, brotherhood, survival. And yet, amid that chaos, the men of Montford Point stood their ground. They didn't just survive the battle, they defined it, not because they were supposed to, but because they refused to be left behind. Take the 5th Marine Division's 8th Field Depot Company, assigned to handle supplies, not combat, not trenches. Their job was to move ammo, fuel, and gear under pressure. Keep the war machine running while others pulled the trigger. But Iwo Jima had other plans. The Japanese targeted supply routes with relentless precision. They knew if you cut off the fuel, the bullets, the food, you strangled the force. So the supply depots became battlegrounds. And these black Marines who were never supposed to fire a shot found themselves in the thick of it. They were armed. They were alert. They were ready. Because there's a truth in war that cuts through every policy, every prejudice, every outdated belief. The enemy doesn't care who you are. And if you don't fight, you die. So they fought. They fought back wave after wave of attacks on ammo dumps. They dug in when shells rained down from Mount Suribachi. They rescued wounded Marines from blown-out vehicles. They manned machine guns when gunners were killed. They bled alongside their white counterparts only to be sent back to silence when the battle was over. But silence can't erase sacrifice. And fire doesn't discriminate. Every Marine who fought on Iwo Jima, black or white, faced the same death. And the Montford Point Marines met it with the same courage. And what of the men themselves? What of those names history almost forgot? There was Sergeant Major Gilbert Hashmock Johnson, one of the first African Americans to train black Marines. a legend at Minford Point. He never made it to Iwo Jima, but he trained the men who did. The ones who would pick up rifles when no one expected them to. The ones who would write their legacy in gunpowder and grit. Or Private First Class James Anderson, who survived the Battle of Iwo Jima and later went on to inspire generations of Black Marines by simply telling the truth about what he saw, what he endured, what it meant to be a Marine when the Corps barely acknowledged your presence. Then there were the unknown ones. The ones without medals, or memoirs, or recognition. The ones buried in that black sand, their names marked only by time and silence. They died for a nation that couldn't yet see them. But they died as Marines. And that means everything. Because here's the truth. They didn't just change the Marine Corps. They forced it to evolve. The courage they showed in battle made the policy of segregation impossible to defend. How could you argue that Black Marines weren't ready for combat after watching them hold the line at Iwo Jima? How could you look those men in the eyes after they'd pulled your wounded from the fire and still say they didn't belong? You couldn't. So quietly, slowly, the walls began to fall. By 1948, President Truman issued Executive Order 9981, integrating the armed forces. The Marines followed, not out of generosity, not out of enlightenment, but because the Minford Point Marines. Thanks so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, you're officially part of the small percentage of people who don't just click away, and that means a lot. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts, your ideas, or even what you'd like to see next. I read every single one of them, and your feedback genuinely shapes the direction of this channel. If you enjoyed the video, tap that like button. It tells YouTube this content is worth sharing. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. We've got more exciting videos coming, and trust me, you'll want to be here for them. This channel is just getting started, and your support helps it grow faster than you realize. Thank you again for spending a part of your day here with me. Stay curious, stay motivated, and as always, take care of yourself. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video.